Hello, oodles and noodles. We have returned. It's been a small hiatus. I had some stuff to do. Specifically, I've been gaming like crazy. Shouldn't have been making videos, I'm sorry. I have loads of reviews coming up. Today I wanted to do a pretty long review since I'll be talking about an entire series. I have really been getting into we'll say online novels more so. I've been reading a lot of things on Royal Road and really getting into progression and light RPG fantasy. I'm a huge fan so far. There's definitely a lot of problems with people who start writing online solely. I mean, many of these novels do eventually, or we could say, they tend to more function in arcs, we can say, and people then tend to just decide a cutoff point and they eventually do release them as books online, but not always. What I'm going to review today is a perfect example. I'm going to be talking about Mother of Learning, which is a really famous series, probably one of the biggest series on Royal Road. It has not been made into a book yet. It is getting a release, but only through, I think it's called Wraith Marked. So they do specialized editions, effectively, of certain novels. They're really nice, but I think the first arc only is coming out at the end of the year. Sometime in December, it's going to get its release date through Wraith Marked, so you can go check that out if you are interested. But again, it's only going to be effectively book one. There are 3 arcs, so 3 books will most probably be made. I'm going to be discussing all 3 arcs today, so the entirety of the series. I blew through it. I really enjoyed it. There are, of course, issues. Again, especially with these style of novels, I've gotten into quite a few other ones since then, and I will say, though, that Mother of Learning is an impressive addition comparatively to a lot of the quality of work that you do see in serial writings. So Mother of Learning follows a young boy who is living in a world that is very dense with magic. There are many different kinds of magic. There's a lot of complexity to the world. And this young boy is part of a relatively wealthy family, but from a small town. And he's going to the academy, to this city where pretty much has built up around this mana well, we'll call it, or a mana dungeon. So there are dungeons in the world, and in these dungeons, mana seeps out. And in this area where this specific city has been built in this country, I'm not going to bother with names. I don't want to ruin anything because I'm going to be talking already so much about the entire series. I'm going to try to keep it as vague as possible for people. So in this city, they've essentially built the entire structure of the city around the fact that this massive dungeon is outputting huge amounts of mana. And so people there can utilize magic at a much higher degree in much higher quantity. Generally speaking, mages can only pull what they can from themselves, so their own mana stores, and that can weaken them quite a bit. They can pull, though, from the world outside of them, the ambient mana in the air, so to speak. And so this area, which is super dense, has become incredibly popular as sort of the focal point of the main country's magical learning, effectively, and where all the crazy magic stuff happens. So our main character is going to the academy there, and he's all right. He's a good magician, but he's nothing special. On top of that, his brother, his older brother, is very world famous, is actually an incredibly well-known mage. And so he kind of has that younger brother hating the older brother because he's basically a popular shit. And our main character is very introverted, shy. He kind of prefers to be all on his own. And so that's how we're starting off this novel, with this kind of introverted, kind of grouchy kid who's just going to school, and he doesn't really talk to much of anyone, doesn't really have any friends, and he's an okay mage. And the month goes along, and as this month passes on, they're getting their summer festival. So there's supposed to be this great sort of solstice, and the planets are aligning in a specialized way that only happens, I think it's every 100 years or something to that effect. And on the day of the festival, the city gets attacked. And when the city gets attacked, our young protagonist gets killed. And here is where the premise of the story starts. Our young protagonist gets killed and then restarts at the beginning of the month. Just awakens back in his bed at home. He hasn't gone back to school yet, and he's freaking the hell out. And that's pretty much, again, without getting into too much detail, is going to be the main premise of the story. Mother of learning. This kid has to figure out how to deal with this impending invasion that he knows is going to happen at the end of the month. And the reset keeps happening, regardless of whether he dies or not. He just keeps resetting over and over and over and over. This is a series where effectively years are passing where our main character is stuck in this reset. There are other people involved. There are other people in the reset, although he is primarily almost always alone. People do eventually start finding out about the reset through him, but again, they forget things. And this is one of the main problems with the novel. It makes it very, very interesting in some ways, but effectively, we can't care about anyone. I mean, you can start to be interested in the support characters, but essentially, they're going to forget very quickly, and resets happen very, very fast. Not a lot of time is spent exploring his friends that he eventually develops and people who he comes to know. We do have moments of tenderness and moments of opening and understanding that happens between him and certain characters, but again, that kind of, we lose that relatively quickly, and there are entire huge chunks of the novel where he's basically all by himself or not bothering with people, or he does go see people who you've had intimate relations with, not physically or anything like that, but who he got closer with, who now he's just barely speaking to. And so that kind of makes it very, very, very difficult to care about the people that are around him. Again, we do have other people who are part of the reset, but he has almost no interaction with them for a very, very large chunk of the novel. Some none at all, except in obviously volatile situations. And so we don't really get to experience anyone but him through this world. Again, we are seeing him get closer and closer and closer to people around him, because through the resets he's starting to understand more and also changing as a person. But his changes, to be fair or unfair, I suppose, are really not done well. He does become less of an introverted person. Obviously, he does become more powerful. This is a progression fantasy. The main character he never becomes this incredibly OP-like damager per se, but he's an extremely intelligent person and doesn't really realize it. That's part of the series where he's always shown in his own mind to be someone who thinks he's kind of average and he doesn't understand, and he thinks maybe, oh, just because I've done the reset so many times, this is why I'm so smart, which is true. But he's also just an extremely smart person, extremely driven, and becomes a very complex character in terms of his magical abilities. That is probably where this series shines the most. The magical complexity in this world, there's so many skills, abilities, time taken to delve into how things work, mind magic, golems, different kinds of combat skills, creation skills, crafting skills. Our character really goes into everything, and we do get to see much more through other characters as well. So in the backbones of the magic of the world, we get an incredibly fleshed out system that's really, really fascinating. It's really, I find, is probably 50% of the driving force of this novel that keeps it interesting, because there's always more. This, of course, is helped by the fact that the author is, in my books, really, really good at writing. He managed, through all of the flaws of the novel, in terms of just the quality of his prose and his writing overall quality, it's just really, really well done. Things are really well paced and allow you to not get bogged down on the fact that a lot of characters just don't get developed. And even our main character just isn't developing in a way that he should, considering how many times he dies and the fact that he's supposed to, essentially, even though he's not I would assume that because he's stuck in a 15-year-old's body, that is going to change how you develop emotionally and just as a person, because as we get older and our body changes and things happen and change, you are going to biologically just change as a person. But he's stuck as a 15-year-old, but essentially becomes up until I think he's at least in his 20s, something like that, early 20s. I can't recall exactly how many years he's stuck in the reset, but it's quite a few. So there's a bit of a stunting of character development overall, just because we can't see that progression. But the world itself, in terms of magic, is just incredibly interesting. The enemies, in some instances, are very, very interesting. In other ways, are massively underdeveloped. We just don't get enough time spent in any point of view outside of our main character, so we don't really understand any motivations of the enemy. Things are just kind of thrown in at the end. It's a bit difficult to judge because there's so many, we'll call it, different kinds of enemies, people who become I suppose issues for our main character that he has to overcome, but they're not really the enemy or part of the major group of enemies. In the same way, there are some enemies that become allies to a certain degree at some points in the story, or different variations thereof. And so again, there's a lot of complexity here. The world is difficult to get into at first because, again, we're having multiple resets. Our character doesn't get any support from the people around him because they're just constantly forgetting everything about him, and the world is not properly explained at the beginning. It takes a while, probably into the middle of the second arc, before you get a really decent large picture of the world, the country, the cities, the interactions between them. It takes a while, but again, there's enough of a buildup and enough time spent in your character learning things and new abilities and skills that you don't really notice it as much. You really have to be a nerd for magic and systems and progressions and things like that. I'm not huge into that, but the series was written well enough and was interesting enough that it was fun. And the main character is someone who is really utilizing many different styles of magic to be able to make himself capable of accomplishing different goals. So he's not, because he wasn't just OP from the start and just very slowly gets stronger and stronger and then accomplishes his goals through many different kinds of magical implementations, and also just, of course, the fact that he resets and gets to know what's actually happening. You know, he dies in horrible ways and then understands the system better. And that doesn't mean he doesn't die right away. There are some enemies that still kill him consistently over and over again. We never get to a real point where he's so OP that he can take care of things on his own. In fact, group building and allies are a huge part of this series, and he learns how to carry information between one reset to the next, so at least he can convince allies and get them along with him. So that adds a fascinating dynamic to it. But again, you still don't get to really get this closeness. Friendships are not really developed much at all. There's no romantic relations. There's time spent with, you could say, romantic interest in these tiny little random thrown off ways that I actually found quite annoying. They were a waste of time because they didn't lead to anything. Because again, we have the resets, and yeah. So I would say my biggest issue with this whole series is just character development, side character development, support character development. I feel like there is a thing that allowed the resets to be overcome in a small way that I don't want to really get into, but that was utilized, as far as I'm concerned, in not a good fashion, and just didn't really serve a purpose to me except to start building some character growth and then rip it away from us. So again, definite issues with character development. Our main character has good development overall and is a pleasurable character. Like, I blew through all three of these arcs, and they're relatively large arcs very quickly. but he's not the most fascinating person because he's so introverted and so in his own head and kind of a grouch. It makes it a bit difficult to care immensely about him, but he's fun enough and intelligent enough and clever enough that it keeps you going. The world itself and the magic system is really where this novel series just shines really hard. Again, it takes a little while to build into it, but once you give it time and it starts rolling and rolling and rolling, it's really fantastic. I would have to say my number one complaint, if we were to put character development to number two, my number one complaint is the fact that we're pretty much almost till the end of the series in the resets. Of course, our main character does manage to get himself out, but then kind of the main events happen and the novel ends. I had a big issue with that. I would have much preferred if we spent a lot of time after the main character gets pulled out of the reset, where everything that he had accumulated through the resets of talking with people and then we could have spent time actually having more development of his relations with people and the world and actually gotten to see more of the world after. That doesn't happen. I don't really mind spoiling that for people because you pretty much figure that out relatively quickly by the end of the first arc. You're like, this is just going to keep going. it's kind of how the whole setup is done. But yeah, I like this novel to a very large degree. I would say that if I were to give it a rating on 10 because of the support character issue, I would only put it at like a 7. If that would have been fixed, it would definitely be a 9 for me. Like, I enjoyed the series that much. The action, the magical development, the cast of characters are actually interesting people. We just don't spend enough time seeing them grow because of the resets. So it would have been really great if we just spent some more time with them, actually seeing them grow and actually in relation to our main character. But because we don't get that, because we lose it constantly, and then there's giant chunks of time where they're not even involved at all, and we lose certain characters, we kind of lose out on that. And I think there was a lot of potential there for the author to really expand our main character's growth through the support characters and other people. And it would have been nice to spend a little bit more time with the baddies, actually knowing stuff about them and seeing the world through their eyes and what was happening. But we don't really get that well anyway, so yeah. Overall, I definitely recommend reading this, especially if you're a progression nerd, especially if you're a magic system nerd, especially if you think Harry Potter. I don't want to put Harry Potter because that's more like, actually the Magic Academy doesn't even really play that big of a part in it. It's not Harry Potter, just a badass magic system that just has a character stuck in a reset learning about tons of crazy magic. That's basically all you need to know, and that helps a lot. There's way more to it. I don't want to ruin it too much. I definitely find that with progression novels, a lot of people tend to either make their characters way too OP, or they spend so much time on the progression system, especially for reading something that's more light RPG, so there's more game mechanics. There's either too much time spent on that, like showcasing them off, but not adding enough complexity to in terms of how these things are actually affecting our character and their interaction with the world, or the character is just so goddamn strong, so fast, that it becomes a moot point because they don't even need to understand anything. They're just so strong they can destroy everything and get anything they want. This series really overcame that and just made learning about magic really interesting and cool and fun. And that was a surprise for me. I've loved magic systems before. I've read a lot of books that had really interesting, cool magic systems, but never to this degree. I really hope the author actually continues the series, or at least allows us to see the world a bit more. I'm not sure if he will, if ever. I mean, I think this series has been done for quite a while, and even then it took a long time before the author decided to start releasing it as a physical book. It's not even separated into ebook format, I think, on Amazon. I might be wrong on that, but I did a quick search and didn't see it. It seems to only be on Royal Road, the whole entire series, and that's it, which is great for people because you can just go read it for free right now. I definitely take advantage of that. For people who have not gone into, I think there's also Wattpad, which is really good for that, although I haven't started reading anything on there. But I've found quite a few good series on Royal Road so far. There's a few others that I'm definitely going to be doing reviews on. I have The Hedge Wizard coming up. I have Primal Hunter that I've got to do a review on. There's He Who Fights with Monsters that I've got to do. So there's quite a few that I've found, but this I would say is probably number one in terms of just epic magic system. Yeah. Well, I hope you guys and girls enjoy it. If you do read it, if you have, let me know what you think down below. Like, comment, subscribe. Check out the website, geektales.ca. I am going to try to get off my ass and get more reviews out as quickly as possible. I know that I've said that before, and I'm going to keep saying it because I can't really say anything else. Have a good day.